Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you do a quick stretch before we jump into our final official workshop of the day. This one is titled Collaborating with Key Partners. So you're going to see some faces that you've seen throughout the MRSS conference. We've got Beth Boyle joining us, our Northwest Engage 2.0 project director, as well as Heather Wells, who is our Southwest Engage 2.0 project director, and Kelly Kennard from Coleman Health Services out of Stark County. I'm not sure which one of you all are going to go first. Beth, I can see you on my screen, and I see the presentation is popping up currently.
I think that I'm first.
Oh, perfect. There you are, Heather. I see you as well.
And actually, I'm just going to speak. So this is Heather Wells. I'm the project director in the Southwest region for Engage. And I'm going to speak for just a minute, but then there's a couple of other folks that are actually doing the work that I wanted them to be able to share their experiences. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is our catchment area, Warren, Preble, Clinton, Claremont, and Butler counties. And we're going to be speaking pretty exclusively about the Warren County collaboration. I knew that Kathy Craig was going to be presenting, and I knew she would be speaking, as she did very well, about the collaboration, the key collaboration they had with the juvenile justice system in Claremont County. So I wanted to focus on a collaboration that hasn't been discussed yet. And that is, if you want to go to the next slide. So this was a relationship between MRSS provided by Butler Behavioral Health and the child welfare system in Warren County. So early in our learning about MRSS, we heard, I'm a former child welfare worker, started my career in child welfare. And we learned that in New Jersey, their MRSS team responds to initial placements of children in foster care. And they do that in order to stabilize placements and to prevent placement disruption. If you've worked in child welfare or just in the system in general, you know how detrimental it is to children to experience a placement disruption. And just how traumatic the act of placement can be for that child. If you want to go to the next slide. So today I want to introduce I'm going to speak just a couple more slides, but Susan Walther is the director of Warren County Children's Services in Lebanon, and she heard this same information at a meeting and immediately jumped on it and said, I want that for our kids. And then Eric Cavey is the program supervisor. He wasn't involved in the original collaboration. The initial program supervisor was, but he has taken it over since her departure. So if you want to go to the next slide. Again, in New Jersey, we learned about the MRSS response to placements. We discussed it at our change team and initial meetings. And that led to a meeting between Rebecca Tuck, who is the program supervisor, and Susan Walther and myself. We discovered or discussed a plan for who would be referred from the child welfare system, and then what the expectations for the MRSS team would be. That initial conversation led to the development of an MOU between the two organizations that was also signed off on by the county boards, mental health and recovery boards. And then we've since had discussions to review that MOU, make revisions to the process in order to make sure that it's working. So if you want to go to the next slide. Our original conversation was around targeting children's placement, initial placement of foster parents or kinship caregivers in order to help address any immediate needs and concerns related to that child's placement, and sort of provide skills if needed for the caregivers to meet the needs of the children that have been placed in their home. Later, Susan worked with her quick response team in Warren County, and they added children who have been present when a caregiver overdosed. So if the law enforcement or emergency services responded, then MRSS referrals were made. And then at our last meeting, we expanded it to children, not just their initial placement, but any placement change. So if you want to go to the next slide. So I'm going to turn this over to Susan Walther to talk about it from the child welfare perspective at this point.
Thanks, Heather. My name is Susan Walther, and I am the director of Warren County Children's Services. And like Heather, I kind of touched on, is we kind of been collaborating since about April of 2019 about having MRSS go to the homes of foster homes that are in Warren, Butler, Clinton, or Preble County to kind of address that transition from children being removed and then being placed in a foster home, or we also did kinship because we wanted to maintain kinship placements also. Really our specific services that they were offering was just responding to those, the youth, and then trying to minimize the trauma they were experiencing, to reduce the number of disruptions, and to also refer children to services that were needed, because we felt like, one, kids were acting out in foster homes. They were going in, acting terrible because they'd had all these things happen to them that they didn't know were happening to them. And the foster parents were like, oh my gosh, these kids are not transitioning well to us. Please come get them. So we were seeing multiple placement changes. And we wanted to really reduce that by providing foster parents and kinship with some skills to address those initial transition trauma responses that kids were kind of having when they were going into the homes, because we tend to really focus on the adults' issues. So what we did was kind of set up a process where when a child was initially removed, whether we took custody or not, it could even be a safety plan, and placed with a kinship or a foster home, we had our caseworkers make a referral within 1 business day. And then an MRSS therapist would respond within 72 hours, and they would assess the children and provide the needs that the foster parents, the kinship, or the children needed. We did send out all the MRSS information to our foster parents as a whole to let them know this is what we're doing, this is what you can expect. For foster parents that did not work for our agency and for kinship, we provided them with the pamphlets for MRSS when we go to their homes, when the children are placed there. That way they're kind of aware of the service and what's going to happen, which we felt has been very beneficial. On our referral form, we are referring children ages 2 to 20 in the 4 counties I've already talked about: Warren, Butler, Preble, or Clinton. And we are giving MRSS as much information as we can. Do they already have providers? Do they have diagnosis already? Are they on medication? Are there behaviors? What's the reason for placement, so that the therapist knows what they're walking into? And we kind of adapted it a little bit. We redid our MOU this year in August to make sure that we were up to date with how things were working. And we feel it's been very beneficial. I did run some numbers from December of 2020 to July of this year, or June of this year. For, as a whole, all children placed by Warren County Children's Services, on average, they have 2.4 moves in their time in placement. We made 27 referrals to MRSS from December to June or May. And the children who were referred to MRSS on an average 1 move. So it did make a difference. I mean, was it MRSS or was it kids placed being, placed close by? But we did see a remarkable difference between the overall placement moves of all the children and then of the children referred to MRSS. And we saw actually every single child placed with kinship that MRSS responded to, there were no moves during that time. The children all maintained their placements. We felt that we got really good response from our foster parents and our caseworkers with this added support. They do feel like it's beneficial for them to come out. They've had some follow-up. When Heather referred to the overdoses, that part of it was that our county, Warren County, received an opiate grant from the federal government, and we had to kind of have a response to overdoses. So our caseworkers respond immediately to all overdoses where there's a child present in Warren County. And we asked MRSS if they would also respond, and they have been doing that. So if a child witnesses an overdose in Warren County, our caseworker responds and we make a referral to MRSS also. And they actually either respond within the 72 hours, but we've also had them respond that same night, which has been wonderful. And some families are receptive, some are not receptive in continuing services. So that's about all I have as far as Warren County partnering with MRSS.
Okay, so thank you, Susan. And I think from Eric's perspective, he was going to talk a little bit about what it is that they actually do when they respond.
Sure, yes. Thank you, Heather. So it's obviously a little bit unorthodox, right? In some way, I guess, because we're not responding to crisis runs, but it's really wonderful and brilliant, in my opinion, in how it fits the broader mission of MRSS to try as much as possible to be upstream of that crisis. And this is such a natural partnership within that context. What we do, I don't know if it's possible to move ahead a couple slides. Here we go. Thank you. Yes. So we reach out to the families, as Susan said, within a very short amount of time, within 2 days of getting their referral, and usually it's the same day. And our conversations are a little bit different because there's not always that same sense of urgency that there is when there's a crisis call through the hotline. But we try to talk about how placements and situations such as the families find themselves in are, at least a moderate increased risk for emotional or even behavioral issues with children. And I hesitate using that word behavioral. It just does tend to resonate with the people that we're speaking to in those moments. And the goal for me is engagement at that point in time, because it's not always an easy sell. Sometimes it is. And I think the caseworkers on Susan's team really help us with that, doing some of that work on the front end, talking to the families about it, and also being partners with us throughout the process. They're very easy to reach, and they work well with us whenever there's issues with not being able to reach somebody, let's say. What tends to happen is we're either able to schedule an assessment, get into the home, and start our process from there, get them into our stabilization services, develop our goals and everything like that. Or B, we aren't able to get their consent to come into the home, but we are able to introduce them to MRSS and give them the resources, information on how to reach the crisis line, on how to reach us, talk about the nuances around the criteria for making a crisis call or calling us directly. And we've seen that utilized as well. So once we're in the stabilization phase with the families from this referral, it looks much like it does with any of our other cases. We have the therapist working with the family on any family systems related issues. Oftentimes there's important stuff to talk about there by virtue of where we're getting the referral. We have the skill builders working with the individuals on coping skills or stress regulation, things like that. And then parent support, as we've talked about previously, all the different ways that peers can help support. And it's not terribly different than when we're doing stabilization with our crisis runs.
Great. Thank you, Eric.
Mm-hmm.
Can you move forward one slide, please? So these are the outcomes that Susan mentioned, and this was really what we are aiming towards. And then could you move forward another slide? Susan talked a little bit with her caseworkers to get some quotes about their experience with it. Again, I think, and then move forward one more. to what foster families say. I just want to throw in a couple more things before our time's up. One is that this was a really intentional effort to meet the needs of a specific group of children at very high risk, and with a very clear purpose. And I think that the outcomes say a lot about what the impact of the relationship has been. The fact that there's a formal MOU, I don't know. I think that helps structure the conversations and documents the agreements in a way that's very helpful. But this is something that, Susan was very passionate about, and the MRSS program was very passionate about. And so it was a very easy relationship to move forward. The other thing that I want to say just real quick about MRSS is we talk, as someone who's worked in the child welfare system and who's worked in child abuse prevention, MRSS is a child abuse and neglect prevention opportunity. And I don't think that we think about that enough. We see it as a treatment intervention, but really this is strengthening families, whether they be kinship families, foster families, or biological or, families. And it builds so many protective factors that protect children from child abuse and neglect. And I just want to throw that in there. I don't know that I've heard anybody say it yet. It's very important. So I think that's the end of our presentation, and turn it over to Beth.
Thanks, Heather. Great job, Heather, Susan, and Eric. I would agree, Heather. I can't agree more. So in the Northwest, I came to the project almost 2 years ago, and so as partnerships were developing, we meet quarterly. I meet with teams and their mental health boards quarterly. And so as we're meeting quarterly, developing and identifying the partnerships that were needed, this is the list of partnerships that were common amongst all teams. The only ones that I would add to are local hospitals. I think it's important that those partnerships are developed within the community, and also to law enforcement, as we've talked about. What a need that is to make sure that you have strong partnerships with your law enforcement to mitigate the out-of-home placement, which is what our ultimate goal is for MRSS. Next slide, please. So when those partnerships were developed, there was kind of a why behind it. Many identified that there just wasn't the partnership within child serving communities. I can think about a community through COVID that had MRSS not been a part of that community, we're unsure of what might have happened to those children who desperately needed services, because many child serving agencies closed during that COVID time, that really critical COVID time that we were in. There was a notice, an increase in juvenile court systems. The crisis calls for, or not necessarily crisis calls, but calls from the juvenile court system had increased, and the numbers were astronomical for a very small community. There was a recognized that stabilization is only as strong as the partnership within the community, that it's very cost effective to partner. So when teams can come together, we're talking about that stabilization, that 4 to 6 week period where we're giving warm handoffs to different agencies to get to know the family. Those partnerships have to be strong, because we also too present and hopefully have gained trust of the family. And so if we understand the agencies that families are being referred to, then we're making sure that families have a good fit for resources. And then of course the cost effective, where we're not duplicating services, but really kind of dividing and conquering who needs to be a part of the team, and making sure that there's not that duplication. Families are tired. And so we have to make sure that we're purposeful in our handoffs, and we are building a strong partnership externally and then internally within the home for the family. Next slide, please. So how was the need identified? Again, an increase in juvenile probation with limited mental health resources for youth. Juvenile probation, they're really good at what they do, but they also too need to have those resources to call on as well. And it does take the entire community to support a child. We had an increase in youth crisis referrals. And then as we all are very well aware, COVID-19 had more families at home and less interaction with schools. So there wasn't that second set of eyes that was able to help the children, or identify something that was going on. And so it really created an additional risk within communities where those partnerships had to be established. Next slide. Here's just a partnership example. There was a rural community, scarce resources, didn't know exactly what were those resources within their community, and there weren't any partnerships with Family and Children First Council, which we've heard from multiple teams that this connection with Family and Children First Council, or you'll hear us say FCFC, is a really critical piece to being able to continue kind of wrapping around services and being able to provide that stabilization piece and being able to transition out. As a result of this, it created, this team particularly created bi-weekly meetings with key child serving entities. They would discuss those family referrals, kind of join forces together to figure out how are they best going to support the family, kind of who can do what to help the family become successful. It built better communication within the community, and understanding of each role. So agencies had the opportunity to say, here's what we do, here's what they do. And it gave that better understanding of what entities can help with. We, in our field, we often are wanting to just find that thing. And so we want to make sure that thing is actually something of value to the family and will be helpful. It also, with this partnership, when the team kind of opened up to their community, they developed MOUs, and that MOU helped them understand that the partnership really is kind of a two-way street. So it's what we'll do for you and what you can do for us. And then we would see referrals coming from maybe like Family and Children First Council knew of a family and they would refer to MRSS, just like MRSS was referring to Family and Children First Council. And it made it a nice holistic approach to serving families, a holistic approach to helping families. So next slide. One thing that I haven't heard us talk much about was, the Engage 2.0 grant actually is a regional effort. We have a Southwest region and Northwest region. And then while the regions operated in silos, we also, Heather and I have worked through creating some joint efforts as well. So the regional partnerships, we developed what we call learning communities. Those learning communities is where everybody comes together from either region, all come together to learn something from each other. So it helped foster the learning. We could collaborate on ideas for implementation. We had takeaway tools to try immediate, and then opportunities to provide input on practice standards, self-assessment, and MRSS rules. We had the opportunity in these learning communities. We met with an entity that was hired through OhioMHAS to develop the rules, the practice standards, and our self-assessment. And so these learning communities gave those who were piloting the project the opportunity to provide some critical input on what are the practice standards, what makes sense, what are you experiencing, a self-assessment to measure, is our team meeting the mark, and where are some areas that we need to develop, and then what are some of our really strong suits that we can share with others. It also allowed us to have an opportunity and forum to provide the input on the MRSS draft rule that's still in draft, or the MRSS rule that's still in draft. I started to hear, I would meet with our national consultants. You've heard from both of them, Sarah Becker and Dr. Chris Morano. And I would start to hear some similar ideas, like similar needs that teams were having, similar stories that they were all encountering. And so I talked with Rick and Wilma and came up with this, the three of us came up with this idea to have family and child consultation. And so what that is an opportunity, and we partnered it with the learning community. So typically what we do is we have a family and child consultation for 1 hour, the first hour, and then the second hour is our learning communities.
Architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults.
Is that on
In
my
this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as
Someone
young
needs to
children
take you to
instinctively serve
mute.
through battle.
serve and return is a wonderful thing for people to learn now. It is important. So what we've done with the family and child consultations, and we have them monthly, we ask for teams to bring a case or a family and a child scenario to our larger team. And our team is everyone who is a part of MRSS. We invite all of the providers, the board members. There's a hub from Rick's team at Centers of Innovative Practice of some child experts, psychologists, counselors. And then we brainstorm, the team presents the scenario, kind of what the family's looking for, what areas are they struggling with, and we brainstorm ideas to help better serve the family. We capitalize on the expertise of other MRSS staff doing the work, so everybody has the opportunity to ask questions, ask kind of more deeper dive questions, and then provide ideas that maybe they've tried. We do provide a written recommendation list for teams to immediately implement after the consultation. And what this has done is led to fostering a better understanding of what is MRSS and the service delivery model. It's a lot of words, I get, but really what it boils down to is it helps those teams prioritize what is their role. So they're handed like this huge thing, and then the consultation helps them kind of boil down to say, okay, you have 4 to 6 weeks to work with this family. Let's help prioritize. What are some immediate things we can do? And then what are some of the long-term things that we can do? And so that helps that team kind of frame their role, frame their expertise, figure out what community resources can be matched to the needs of the family. And then everybody learns, right? So the next time another team has a similar scenario, they kind of have gained a better understanding of maybe how to navigate that child's journey and referral. So we have learned that key partnerships are not just within our own communities, but they're also with those who are doing the work. And so we can't just look within our own silos and within our own communities. We really need to partner with, have key partnerships with those who are doing the work. So everybody, doesn't matter where you're from, if you're doing MRSS, you're an expert in it, we should all come together, collaborate, and learn from each other. So, okay, next, I think that is the end of mine. If anybody has any questions, I'll put my contact information in the chat too, if you're interested in joining in on the family and child consultations, just to kind of see what they're like, and maybe something to adopt within your own region or join ours. We're happy to, we always say the more the merrier. It does really take a lot of collaboration, a lot of ideas. We hear some really tough scenarios and that only get that 4 to 6 weeks of our attention. And so how do we help those families in that stabilization process? So thanks everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to present today.
All right, so then good afternoon. My name is Kelly Kennard. I am a pre-screener here in Stark County as part of our new key partnership with Stark County Family Court. I am a field worker, much as Eric is. So while I will try my best to explain kind of where the program came from and how it got to be, the majority of my knowledge is going to be what I do every day and what that looks like out in the field. So if I can have my first slide, perfect. Okay, so what I know is that this new program was developed thanks to the SAMHSA System of Care Expansion Grant, as well as Stark Mars combination or correlation with Coleman Crisis Services. So Coleman is the MRS provider here in Stark County. So in a collaboration with Stark County Family Court, a need was identified in our juvenile court system in an attempt to lower recidivism. So what we were finding, or what the data was showing, is that previous to this new program, the main two options that Stark County Juvenile Court had was to either go an informal route, which led the kids typically through diversion, or probation. Those were really the only two options that they had. So their goal was to create off-ramps. So for kids who maybe had significant enough charges that it had to go through the formal system, or were repeat offenders and therefore were getting to a place where they would be sentenced to probation, trying to give them one more off-ramp, a way to work services, have the court proceedings paused or temporarily placed on hold in order to allow these children and their families to work services and maybe then not be sentenced to probation. So that was the overall goal, trying to lower recidivism. On the next slide, if you want to go to that, it talks a little bit about the development of the program thus far. So initially, like I said, so when I first, I joined the team last December, we kind of hit the ground running back in February. So the number one focus, the first way that MRSS was involved in Stark County Family Court was focused on domestic violence charges. The court data was showing a very high recidivism rate for domestic violence kiddos. They believed that a big piece of that is because they were released from the attention center, returned right back to the same home with a lot of the same issues, referred to services, but by the time those services were put in place, what they were finding is these children were acquiring very rapidly before those services could be executed. So as an worker, one of my main focuses, what they would do is the magistrate, when a child was arrested, placed at the attention center, they used our MRSS services to go into the attention center, complete a pre-screen and develop a safety plan, as well as complete a risk assessment. That was difficult in some capacities. As Eric kind of mentioned, working on engagement, it is big. And so a lot of times I would get engagement from the child at the center. The parent would then agree to go ahead and let them come home. And that actually went both ways. So sometimes I was called if a child refused to return home and said that they did not want to. Sometimes I was called because the family said, I do not feel safe going to get my child. Sometimes the court was very aware that the child did not have any services in place, and therefore how could the situation improve if we release them? But it was new. It was new for these families. So for me to call and introduce myself and say, hi, the court has requested a safety plan and a pre-screen. My name's Kelly. I'm going to go down and see your child, and then I'd like to come to your house and kind of talk about some of the challenges that you're seeing at home. Those families really landed all over the map. Some of them were very open to services, super excited, had nowhere to turn. Some of them were frustrated because it was a potentially like repeat offender that they're like, I know that you want to do a pre-screen and you want to do the safety plan, but they've done this 3 times. So trying to get the parents' engagement and understanding, like one more time. Let's try one more time and let's see if we can change it up. So that was the primary focus. So that is what I did as an MRSS worker for the first couple months. Step 2, as we were trying to expand the program within the court system, step 2 was the diversion department. So what they were seeing is that the cases that were going informally, which is through the diversion department, the diversion officers would call these families in and they ask, what's going on? How can I be helpful? Those diversion officers were seeing a definite potential benefit from having MRSS workers and those services with those families as well. So that is another way that referrals come to me. A diversion officer will call, sometimes with them in the office, sometimes they'll have me join them and just go ahead and meet them there. Sometimes they will just give me their contact information and kind of have me do like a caring contact follow-up, offering my services. But those families, because of, I already heard it mentioned, the wait list here in Stark County as well. So that was a good opportunity to get crisis services in place immediately that could last those 4 to 6 weeks and kind of gap between being released or having their charge and getting involved in services. So we kind of offer those services to bridge the gap. Oh, it says my internet is unstable. Can you guys still hear me okay?
Yeah, Kelly, we can hear you just fine.
Okay. So then most recently, the program added a third layer as to the ways that I'm getting referrals. So, and it, I would say, is probably the busiest referral avenue that I have. So in addition to the domestic violence charges that we were seeing and the elevated number of those, we all attributed those very much, like you guys have been talking about, to COVID. These kids are in their home, they're not at school, they don't have that reprieve or that natural structure and break from their families. So domestic violence was first, the diversion cases were second. The third very large opportunity that we saw was through the unruly complaints that were filed by parents. So Stark County Family Court had looked at the avenue for unrulies, and a very large percentage were families. So what that means is that families come to Stark County Family Court, they fill out a form, they want to file charges. Those charges are in fact status offenses and therefore automatically go informally and through diversion. So what they were finding is that the families were filing these complaints, the diversion officers were calling. Often the families would not follow through. You know, they call and follow up and the families don't show, or the families are very frustrated because what they thought they would get was their child being put on probation or put in the detention center, the attention center. They want jail time, you know, what they want, things like that. And that just is not the reality of how the process works. So what we do now is anytime a parent files an unruly complaint, I am actually the first port of contact. So what I do is I call, I gather basic information as to what they have going on in their home. I complete their form with me over the telephone, and then break down what the court procedure will look like. So somebody from diversion will call you. They're going to have you come in. You're going to meet in an office. You're not going to be in front of a judge. There will be consequences given to your child, but they will look like any example of the following, you know, community service, blah, blah, blah. So I explain what that procedure looks like and then offer options. So some of these parents are very frustrated. You know, they want their child to have some sort of consequences. They want their child to be scared straight, you know, things of that nature. It is their right and their option that they want to go ahead and file those unruly complaints. They do, in fact, go through diversion and they say, "Thank you, Miss Kelly, you seem super sweet, but I do not want your services at this time." That's fine. That they're allowed to do that. Option number two, sometimes, is the parent is on the phone and they say, "You know what? I hear you. I hear about this MRS services. I also am to a point or have threatened filing these charges on my child to enough that I feel like I have to follow through," kind of proving my point or holding myself accountable. So yes, I would like to go ahead and file these complaints. And also, if we could get your services in place, that would be fantastic. That's probably another third of the referrals that I get. And then option number three, which is always my favorite, is when I explain what the court proceedings look like and offer my temporary MRSS services with the goal of ongoing linkage and finding their forever person. A lot of parents, probably another third, by the end of that conversation are on the phone crying because they don't want their child to be court involved and they don't want their child to start their criminal history here, especially at the hands of their own filing. But they're at a loss. They don't know where else to turn, and what they were hoping for was accountability and support, and they are relieved to find that support through an MRSS worker or some type of mental health provider as opposed to the court system. So those are about, it's like 30% of each. Some do not want my services and they go ahead and file. About a third of them do both, and about a third of them choose not to file, in which case I just document it, send it off to the court system not wish to file and they want to engage in services instead. If you could go to the next slide. Perfect. Okay, so what the MRSS framework looks like for me. So I am currently the only MRSS worker, so it's me. I do try to stick to the 4 to 6 week stabilization, as is the framework. There are times where we do extend it a little bit. It is always due any sort of delay in linkage, a wait list, things like that. But what my MRSS work looks like is, like I already said, I complete the pre-screen and a risk assessment. Those are the risk assessment and the safety plan are definitely the #1 priority of the court system. Before they release a child from the attention center, they want to know what the risk is. Of course, I get a release of information. Then what I do is I give the court a copy of the safety plan. A lot of these kids are released from the attention center on pretrial services, which means they have a court personnel following up with them, and that safety plan is helpful for them to have and refer or redirect the family to when they call. I then am the person who meets with them weekly, bi-weekly, twice a week, whatever it is that they need, working on some basic skill building. The priority, or I guess the main thing that we do when I'm working with these families in the community is understanding what their triggers are and what their warning signs are. A lot of these children are aggressive, they are traumatized, they are triggered, and they have no idea. I consistently hear, Miss Kelly, I go from 0 to 100 in 3 seconds. I don't have any warning signs. Identifying what their warning signs are, when you get that pit in your stomach, or when you start to shake, or when you start to think, I don't want to do this anymore. I have to leave. And that's why you run off, or that's why you run away or sneak off at night. So understanding their own warning signs, as well as communication patterns. A lot of these families struggle with, I talk about the ledger a lot. So your child needs a fresh start, your family needs a fresh start. So I understand that it is frustrating when they came home 20 minutes late, and I understand why it in your head relates to the 17 times that they've done the same thing. Today is today, and trying not to dredge up the past or past experiences, because it's just not beneficial to the conversation right now. Anybody who is working with me I am available to them. They understand what my working hours are, and they can call me. So the majority of the pre-screens and MRSS's responses that I get are what we would consider a pass. So for the most part, I'm responding within 24 to 48 hours, most likely within the first 24 hours. But then after that, they have contact information for myself or our team through the typical crisis hotline, that if they need a new crisis intervention, they have those resources available to them. And then I also work on linkage and referral. So a big piece of what I do the very first time when I meet with these kids and their families is explain that my services are temporary. I am not your forever person. So if there are things that you want to discuss with me that you think are important for me to know and understand in order to find you your right person, your forever person, please share them with me. But I do not encourage, opening those cans of worms. That could be very counterproductive to their therapeutic process to open up to me, just to have me try to pack it back up within 4 to 6 weeks and then refer them to somebody else. So I try to make it very clear what our goal is here, what stabilization looks like, what's appropriate for that type of treatment and what's not, and then just kind of weigh the pros and cons with them as we go. Some of the barriers that we run into, trying to stick to our MRSS framework while working with a specific population, having everybody on the same page as to what my role is. There is definitely some confusion at times, either families, court personnel, employees, whoever, just gets kind of confused as to my role. So a lot of them think that I'm a probation officer or a pretrial officer. They think I'm their new provider. I've been referred to as their therapist many times, and trying to reiterate what my job is and what my role is. I'm a Coleman employee. I'm an MRSS worker. So that means your family was identified in crisis. If you would like my services, I can help your family get stable enough to be appropriate for long-term services. So that's definitely a common theme that I see. helping everybody understand that MRSS work needs to be voluntary. So sometimes, depending on how my services are prompted to these families or offered to these families, they are very much under the understanding that it is court ordered. What we know based on statistics and studies is that court ordered services does not always go well. I run into a lot of hesitation. Some kids don't want to talk to me. Sometimes they do because they think that they have to, or the families do because they think that they have to. After a couple of sessions, they just kind of fall off. I typically attribute that to just their overall view of what my services are. I try to constantly follow back up and reword myself, or find out what their hesitation is or what their resistances are, so that I can be better for the next family when I'm trying to discuss what it is that I can offer. Maintaining the MRSS framework is just hard in general. These kids are kids in crisis. These are families in crisis, and their crisis looks different. So sometimes they're not suicidal, they're not homicidal. I think everybody sometimes struggles with assuming that children who are aggressive, or people that are aggressive, must be homicidal in some nature, and they're not. What they are is upset, and what they are is in pain, or they are hurting, and they need support, and they really do want that support. So trying to get them to trust me, get them to trust the process, while also keeping in mind that I am not their forever person, is a difficult boundary to find. My court presence has also been an issue. So being asked to come into the courtroom, being asked to testify or give some sort of treatment summary, I avoid the courtroom as much as humanly possible. The parents often want me, or the kids want me. I want you to come in and I want you to tell them how awesome I'm doing, and reminding them that once I step into that courtroom, I can't pick and choose what it is that I'm going to say. So yes, I would love to tell them that you're doing fantastic, but if they ask me if you have snuck out at all, and I know that you have, I'm going to have to say that you have. So I try very hard to stay out of the courtroom, so that they, in their mind, can separate what mental health is and what the court system is. I'm their safe person. I don't really want to be the person who reports everything back to the court. And then releases of information. So that has been another pretty hefty barrier, because the court is referring them to me. I then have to go to the family and try to get a release of information to relay anything back. So that was kind of a learning curve, I think, for all of us, that just, I can't tell you everything, and the family didn't sign off for me to tell you that. And we've gotten into a couple situations with subpoenas, and I need to know this information. And so far, it has not ever gotten that far. The family is pretty understanding that the reason that they are involved is because their child unfortunately got themselves into trouble, and the court needs to know what it is that I know. So next slide. Okay, so then the last thing, so because it is just me for right now, and we have not expanded the program yet, we are constantly looking for other ways to maximize the benefit for these Stark County families. So we are continuing to notice some gaps that we're experiencing. So one being with the unruly complaints specifically. So a lot of parents come to Stark County Family Court wanting to file an unruly complaint based on the recommendation of law enforcement. So trying to get law enforcement on board further. It's not that they're not, just getting them on board further, to understand what the court process looks like, and how maybe I could get involved sooner, or MRSS could get involved sooner. Because ultimately referring them to the court to file an unruly complaint proves not productive for what it is that the parents are looking for. So further collaboration with law enforcement is always the number one priority for us. Another one that we are trying to focus heavily on is, now that these kids are back in school, working and collaborating with school districts, resource officers. There are a couple school districts in Stark County who have higher numbers of unruly complaints that are filed. We would love to get into those school districts and try to help those resource officers or that school personnel, and have a bigger presence in those school districts specifically. Probation, the probation department. So that is, I think, the next court-specific program that we are hoping to get involved in. Just like I said, I'm now pretty embedded in the diversion department. I know that probation violations and parole violations are another big factor to the recidivism rate in Stark County. So when a parent is struggling with their child and they call their probation officer, the probation officer comes out, for example, they have them give a drug test and then they end up getting a probation violation. We're hoping that we could work hand in hand with those probation officers or with those families who have children on probation so that we could offer our services, hopefully in an attempt to keep them from accumulating new charges. So those are the ways that we're hoping to get involved, but it is a slow process. But I mean, really, since February, it's gone from 1 program to 3 within that program. So it's very exciting. I think that's my last slide.
All right, thank you, Kelly. Thanks, Beth. Thanks, the team out of the Heathers area and Southwest region. Now's the time. We have a few minutes if you have any questions that you'd like to pop into the chat. I was taking a look as you guys were all presenting. Mostly were comments and commending you on the work that you've already been doing. So fantastic work. But you do, like I said, folks, you have a few minutes if you want to ask some specific questions to this group. And don't forget, we also have the Q&A after a lunch break here. It looks like we do have a question. How are you all interacting with your DD boards?
I can just say we haven't done anything like a specific MOU with the DD boards in our region, but we do have representation from a couple of boards on our change team. And so they are engaged in that way. And we've been able to talk about the needs of the families that they serve. We also did some very specific training with one of our MRSS teams around the needs of children with autism, as we were seeing a significant number of children either diagnosed with autism or suspected of autism. And the MRSS team felt that they really needed additional skills and knowledge. And so we did some early on in the project. We had a consultant provide some training for the team so that they were equipped to address the needs of those children and families.
This is Beth Boyle. The same for us. We had representation on our regional change team. Also too, within the learning community and the family and child consultation, we have representation from the Department of Developmental Disabilities. So they are on there making sure that we're also seeing the resources from across the state from DODD. And then also too, we'll see a lot of networking between the two teams, like, hey, we have this child, how do we? What are some resources you've used? But definitely the county boards have been a referral source and partner within most of the teams that have children with developmental disabilities, or even a suspicion that maybe the child does have a developmental disability. A referral is made and engagement happens that way as well.
Fantastic. Kelly, would you like to jump in?
Sure. I would say, just as a worker in the field, my interaction with the DD board is very specific to either their individual worker, if they have one. That's a question that I always ask during my pre-screen. So if they have one, I make sure to get a release and talk to them as soon as I possibly can, as well as just calling if I do suspect that they could use that benefit. That is always a referral that I try to put in place.
Fantastic. Any other questions to the group here? While we're waiting, I kind of have one, and it's really just more of a, what would you like to see? I heard someone ask that yesterday, or maybe it was Rick asking our keynote this morning, what would you like to see in the future of MRSS, right? You guys have been a part of this project for some time, looking at Beth and Heather, and I know you're doing this work, Kelly. So what are your future hopes for this service?
I guess having been involved from the beginning of the grant, I think we really need to be able to build the capacity to meet the needs, the demand that's there. And of course, that points to a number of issues in terms of funding positions and staffing those positions, which is really a significant challenge and has been from the beginning. I'm very fond of the child welfare MRSS and excited about the opportunities there, and wish that that could be expanded and might draw in additional support, i.e. funding from the child welfare system, ODJFS potentially, because I do think those are children in crisis and families in crisis, and it's a very concrete way to help mediate some of the trauma that those children have experienced. And then, as our keynote yesterday morning talked about, really how do we do more prevention of later behavioral health issues? And I think that meeting children at the time of trauma is a way to do that. So I would love to see that become a key part of the statewide implementation of MRSS.
What I like to see as part of this, I agree with Heather, the kind of the branding has happened for MRSS. We have a definition, we have those things, but taking it further into making sure that teams are trauma informed and that families are now making the referral, because families have heard of other families who have used it. We're starting to see that trend, but really hope to see that more families are making their own referrals and seeing the necessary help, less than agencies or probation officers or the court system or children's services, but really families are mitigating their own risk and their own out of placement from their homes with their kids. Also to just the expansion of workforce, hoping that our new kind of generation of college folks or licensed individuals will see the importance of home-based services and how kids deserve to be met where they are, and that's usually in their homes and their own, whether it's the risk or not, but it's still their home and their safety and sanctuary of what they best know. And so I just hope that our workforce starts to see the value in home visit. I too started my career in child welfare, so Heather and I are on the same, and so that experience was so valuable to how I've grown as a professional, because you go into homes and you see a different side of things versus coming into an office. Trying to think of other future things, just the whole, I think the collaboration, right? Like law enforcement will start to utilize us versus, coming to a home and really kind of staking their purpose in the community as that serve and protect, not the mediator between maybe mom and parent. That really, that's what other folks can do for them. And that they see that they're not the only resource in the community that can help with that too. So I think that's good. I feel like that's like a Miss America speech, like what I would like for the future is. Sorry.
No, it's a good answer. It's a good answer. Kelly, we have a few seconds if you'd like to jump in if Heather and Beth haven't covered it for you.
Oh, they did fantastic. I don't know, doing the work. I think my wish is always that somebody would have got involved sooner. I mean, that's just what it is. Absolutely. And so I constantly go back to supervision and I'm like, what red flags were there that somebody missed or brushed under the rug or minimized that it wasn't that big of a deal. So I think that's always my goal, is like, how could we get ahead of it? And that's kind of where it started, just with my own program. We're here, and then it's, let's do this. And then it's like, now I'm like, I don't know how to get ahead anymore within this program. So I think that's just networking with other key partners, I think is just going to be the key for that.
Great. All
Can
right.
I say one more thing, Elena? Oh, go ahead, Wilma.
Oh, yes, Wilma's going to go first, I bet.
Wilma gets the last word. It's fine.
No, I want to connect the dots to a couple of things that's happened here. Bryce and I forgot her name, the lady who does the child welfare work, foster care down in Warren County. Susan had done an excellent presentation. And one of the things that I heard them talk about was when these kids go into the home, the trauma that proposes for them, and that how they handle it makes a huge difference. I'm sitting over here with a group of youth and Youth Move who I would deem to say a third to a half of them have had services in behavioral health system and also have been in foster care. It is a passion of those kids to talk about how they were able to survive it, how they're able to not just be resilient, but be in the forefront of trying to help other kids. That's where that youth peer support could be so helpful. These are young adults who are now out in the big bad world who could help other youth who's going into foster care to understand how they can survive this and give that sense of hope that everybody have talked about for the last couple of days. So I would really advise for your next MOU to think about that. Because I'm just shocked by the number of youth who are a part of this organization who have utilized, who have not been utilized, who have been put in foster care in their life and how it has impacted their life. Because many of them talk about they've been changed from family to family. I wish it was just 2.7, but they're talking about 4 and 5 times.
Right. Yep. That's a great point, Wilma. Okay, everybody, I'm going to wrap us up. I know you've got a lunch break. We'd love to see you come back at 1:45 for our Q&A portion and wrap this conference up. It's been a fantastic 2 days. Please refer to the chat. Laura's dropped the SurveyMonkey link in there so you can access that for continuing education. And if you scroll up a bit, session 9 is also available for you, so you can get that as well. Thank you so much again to our presenters. I will see you all soon. Thank you.